Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
I was 7 when I first noticed that my mother stopped looking at me the way other mothers did their children. It was subtle at first, a glance here and there, but it grew colder with each passing year, like the house itself. My father had left us before I could remember him, disappearing into a void that neither my mother, Antonia, nor I would ever fill. I used to ask about him when I was small. "Mom, where's Dad?" I asked one afternoon, tugging at her sleeve as she washed dishes. Her hands paused, but she didn't turn around. "He's gone, Polly, and that's all there is to it." The finality in her voice stung, but I didn't ask again. It was clear. He was a closed chapter, one I'd never get to read. From that point on, it was just the three of us. Mom, Gemma, and me. Or at least, that's how it appeared. In truth, it felt more like it was the two of them, and I was merely an unwelcome guest in their world. Mom treated Gemma like she was the center of the universe. Their laughter would echo through the kitchen, a melody I could never quite join. I'd stand at the doorway, hoping to be invited in, but they rarely noticed me. "Polly, could you stop standing there and do something useful?" My mother would snap if I lingered too long. I'd grab a dish towel or wipe the table, pretending that helping made me part of their circle, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. Gemma basked in Mom's attention, and why wouldn't she? She was everything I wasn't. Pretty, charming, and effortlessly perfect. I, on the other hand, felt like the awkward shadow lurking in the background. While Gemma had an easy smile, mine always felt forced, as if I had to earn the right to be seen. I still remember one evening after dinner. I was clearing the dishes while Mom and Gemma sat at the table, talking about something I couldn't quite hear. "Polly," Mom called out, her voice sharp. "Are you going to spend the whole evening clattering dishes? Can't you be a little quieter?" I fumbled with a plate, my face flushing with embarrassment. "Sorry, Mom." Gemma shot me a look, one of those subtle smirks that said more than words ever could. She thrived in the attention in the way Mom saw her and only her. I tried harder after that, thinking that if I did everything right, kept my room spotless, got good grades, stayed out of trouble, maybe I'd earn some of that affection too. But nothing changed. In fact, the harder I tried, the more I seemed to irritate her. One Sunday when I was about 11, I made breakfast for the family, hoping to please her. I set the table, made toast and eggs, and waited for her reaction. When Mom walked into the kitchen, she barely glanced at it. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone indifferent. "I made breakfast," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "For all of us." Mom raised an eyebrow and sighed. "You didn't toast the bread long enough. It's too soft." I stood there, the praise I had hoped for evaporating in an instant. Gemma, of course, laughed and suggested we go out for brunch instead. Mom agreed, and just like that, my efforts were dismissed as though they had never existed. That was the moment I realized it didn't matter how hard I tried. In her eyes, I would always be the girl who didn't quite measure up. From then on, I stopped trying to compete for her love. It wasn't worth the heartache. But even as I distanced myself, the hurt lingered like a bruise that never fully healed. I would never be Gemma, and in my mother's world, that made me less. By the time we hit our teenage years, Gemma's influence had grown from a small ember into a roaring fire. She was the golden child in our family, basking in Mom's unwavering affection, while I was left to contend with the shadows. Gemma wasn't just favored, she was untouchable. And she knew it. It started innocently enough, with small things that only a sister would notice. She'd take my clothes without asking, then act surprised when I confronted her. "Oh, Polly, I didn't think you'd mind," she'd say, her voice dripping with fox innocence, while she pranced around in my favorite sweater. And Mom would just wave it off. "Let her wear it, Polly," Mom would say, barely looking up from her magazine. "It looks better on her anyway." Each comment like that dug a little deeper. But as we got older, Gemma's games became more cunning. She wasn't just borrowing clothes or stealing the spotlight at family dinners anymore. Now, she was manipulating me in ways that made me feel small and powerless. One evening, when I was around 15, we were sitting in the living room. Gemma had just returned from a shopping spree, bags in hand, and Mom was, as usual, fawning over her latest purchases. "Look at this dress, Mom." Gemma held up a sleek, shimmering fabric that would cling to her like it was made for her. "Oh, darling, it's stunning," Mom cooed. "You'll look like a movie star." I was sitting quietly, flipping through a book, trying not to care, but I couldn't help it. "It's nice," I said, trying to join in even though I knew it wouldn't matter. Gemma glanced at me, her smile almost predatory. "You know, Polly, I bet I could find something for you at one of the sales racks next time." Mom laughed lightly. "Yes, maybe something a little more simple." They didn't even bother looking at me as they laughed, but I felt it, the sting of their words. Gemma loved these moments, relishing how easily she could get under my skin. And she knew she could get away with it because Mom was always on her side. But her manipulations went beyond just casual cruelty. One summer, we both had our sights set on the same boy. His name was Matt, and he had that effortless charm that teenage girls fawned over. I'd spent weeks building up the courage to talk to him, imagining what it might be like to catch his attention. Gemma knew this, of course, she always did. So one afternoon, as we were getting ready to meet some friends, Gemma slipped into my room. "Polly, you should wear that red top you bought last week. It really suits you," she said, flashing her perfect smile. I hesitated. It wasn't like her to offer fashion advice, but I took the compliment, grateful for a rare moment of kindness. I put the top on, thinking maybe, just maybe, she was finally being nice. But when we got to the park, and Matt saw me, he smirked. "Nice top, Polly. Your sister said you wanted to look extra desperate today." I felt the blood rush to my face, the humiliation hitting me like a wave. Gemma stood beside him, pretending to be oblivious, but her smirk told me everything. She had set me up again. Later that evening, I confronted her. "Why do you always do this, Gemma? Why do you always make me look like a fool?" She feigned innocence. "What are you talking about? I was just trying to help." "You told Matt that I was desperate," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, come on, Polly. It was a joke. You're so sensitive." I could feel the anger bubbling up, but as always, Gemma brushed me off. Like my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience. And when I tried to talk to Mum about it later, her response was exactly what I expected. "Gemma's just teasing you." Mum said dismissively, "You need to stop being so serious all the time." In that moment, I realized something. As long as Gemma had Mum on her side, there would be no escape from her games. She was the queen of our little kingdom, and I was just the expendable pawn in her reign. By the time I was in my 20s, I had started dating, hoping to find some sort of stability outside of the suffocating walls of my family. Love, I thought, would be my escape, a place where I could feel seen and valued. But every time I thought I was getting close to something real, Mum or Gemma would find a way to sabotage it. My first serious relationship was with a guy named Ryan. He was kind, steady, and the sort of person who made me believe that happiness was actually possible. We had been together for about 6 months when I finally decided to introduce him to my family. I remember that dinner so vividly. I had been anxious all day, worrying about what Mum might say or how Gemma might behave. Ryan could sense my nerves as we pulled up to the house. "Relax, Polly," he said, squeezing my hand gently. "It's just dinner. How bad can it be?" I forced a smile, wishing I could believe him. As soon as we stepped through the door, I knew my fears were justified. Mum greeted Ryan with her most saccharine smile, the kind she used for appearances. "Oh, Ryan, isn't it? Polly's told us so much about you." Her eyes flicked toward me, and I could already feel the judgment radiating off her. "I hope you're ready for one of my famous dinners." Gemma, of course, wasted no time making her presence known. She swept into the room wearing a dress that clung to her figure like it was made for her, every hair in place. She looked Ryan up and down with that predatory gleam in her eyes, the one that made me feel like prey in my own home. "Well, well," Gemma said, smiling brightly. "Ryan, right? Polly's done well for herself." She winked at him, her voice dripping with something that made me uneasy. The dinner started innocently enough. Mum chatted about her latest charity event, Gemma chimed in about her new job promotion, and Ryan tried to keep up with the conversation, but I could see him getting more uncomfortable with each passing minute. The tension in the room was palpable. Then, as dessert was served, Mom made her move. "So Ryan," she said, her tone light but pointed, "tell us, what do you see in Polly?" Ryan glanced at me, confused, as if he hadn't heard her correctly. "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing," Mum continued, her smile never faltering. "It's just, Polly's always been a bit different. Gemma's always been the social one, the outgoing one. Polly's a bit quieter, don't you think? I felt my stomach twist as the words sank in. I had heard them before, so many times, but hearing them in front of Ryan made them sting even more. I wanted to speak up, to defend myself, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, looking at me with concern. I don't see it that way at all. Polly's thoughtful, kind, and that's what I love about her. Mom raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. Well, isn't that sweet? Her voice dripped with condescension. I just hope she doesn't get too attached. Polly tends to cling. I couldn't take it anymore. I pushed back my chair and stood up abruptly. Mum, stop. Just stop. For a moment, the room went silent. Everyone stared at me, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. What? I'm just being honest, Mum said, her tone still light, but there was something cold beneath it. Gemma, never one to miss an opportunity, chimed in. She's right, Polly. You've always been a little too needy. The betrayal cut deep, and I could see the effect it was having on Ryan. He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with the entire situation. I didn't blame him. This wasn't the first time Mum and Gemma had sabotaged my relationships. It was a pattern I knew all too well. After that dinner, things with Ryan began to unravel. He became distant, avoiding conversations about the future. Eventually, he ended things, saying that he wasn't ready for a serious relationship. But I knew the truth. Mum and Gemma had planted doubts in his mind, and he couldn't shake them. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of their manipulation pressed down on me. I had lost Ryan, and worse, I had lost yet another piece of myself in the process. Dinner at my mother's house had always been a performance, a well-rehearsed spectacle of perfection where the masks were flawless. But this time, things were different. Callum and I sat across from my mother, Antonia, and my sister, Gemma. The tension in the room was palpable, like a thick fog hanging over the evening. I could see my mother's eyes darting between Callum and me, as if she were trying to gauge how serious we were. Of course, she already had her plan. Callum, my mother said, in that overly sweet voice that always made me want to cringe, it must be a challenge for you to keep up with Polly's ambitions. She smiled, but there was a sting in her words. Callum, ever composed, met her gaze with a calm smile of his own. Not at all, he replied smoothly, his hand resting on mine under the table. Polly's ambition is one of the things I admire most about her. We support each other, and it works perfectly for us. I couldn't help but smile at his response, though the knot in my stomach tightened. I knew what this dinner was really about. My mother had already been probing, testing him for weaknesses, waiting for a moment to undermine me. But Callum was not like the others. He was different. The conversation continued, but with every passing moment I could see my mother working her charm, trying to draw Callum into her web. Gemma, who sat smugly across from me, played her usual role as the golden child. She didn't need to say much. Her presence was enough. She knew she was the favorite, and she basked in it as always. Callum, you seem to have a good head on your shoulders, Antonia said, tilting her head. It's rare to meet someone so level-headed, especially in Polly's world. There it was, another dig at me, hidden behind a compliment. Callum squeezed my hand under the table. I think Polly and I balance each other out well, he said, his voice unwavering. The dinner continued in a blur of small talk and veiled insults, but the tension escalated as dessert was served. My mother, desperate to control the situation, couldn't help herself any longer. You know, Callum, she began, leaning forward slightly, Gemma is single. Such a bright, successful girl. I've always said she needs someone equally exceptional. I froze. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but at the same time, I could. It was just like her, Antonia, always scheming, always trying to control every detail of our lives. I glanced at Gemma, who was playing with her fork, a small smirk tugging at her lips. Callum remained calm, though I could feel his body tense beside me. That's interesting, Mrs. Curtis, he said, his voice still polite, but there was an edge to it. But I'm not sure how that's relevant. Polly and I are happy together. Of course, Antonia said, waving her hand dismissively. But one can't help but think about the future. I couldn't take it anymore. Mother, that's enough, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Callum and I are together. Whatever you're trying to do. It's not going to work. Antonia's eyes hardened, and for a moment, her mask slipped. I'm just trying to protect you, Polly, she said coolly. You've always been so sensitive. I worry about you. I don't need your protection, I shot back. And I don't need you to sabotage my life. The evening ended in uncomfortable silence. Callum and I left shortly after, walking out into the cool night air. I felt the weight of years of manipulation, the constant comparisons, the deep-seated resentment, lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. Callum had my back, and that was all I needed. As we walked back to the car, Callum finally spoke. You don't deserve that, Polly, he said quietly. None of it. And you don't have to put up with it anymore. I looked up at him, my heart swelling with gratitude. I know, I whispered. I think I'm finally ready to let it all go. The fallout from that dinner didn't happen right away. My mother was too clever for that. But Callum and I knew something had to give. Her obsession with controlling everything, with manipulating everyone, had reached its peak. We didn't know how far she would go, until we found out about the conversation she had with Callum behind my back. She said what? I asked, incredulous. Callum sighed, his expression grim. She asked me to leave you and marry Gemma instead. She said I'd have a better future with someone like Gemma, that she was the right one. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I couldn't believe my mother would sink so low though. Deep down, I wasn't surprised. The years of favoritism, the constant sabotage, it had all led to this moment. But Callum had a plan. I recorded it, he said softly, pulling out his phone. I thought you should hear it for yourself. We listened to the recording together, sitting in our apartment in stunned silence. Hearing my mother's voice, so smooth and confident as she tried to convince Callum to leave me, was devastating, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I had concrete proof of her manipulations, something undeniable. We decided to confront her together. This time, I wasn't going to let her win. The confrontation took place at the family home. I felt a sense of déjà vu as we sat in the same living room, where so many battles had been fought over the years. But this time, I wasn't a scared little girl trying to earn my mother's approval. This time, I was in control. When we played the recording, Antonia's face went pale. For a moment, she was speechless, a rare occurrence for her. But then, true to form, she tried to recover. This is all a misunderstanding, she said, her voice tight. I was just thinking of what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone? I repeated, my voice cold. You tried to break us up, Mother. You've been doing this for years. Manipulating, lying, always playing us against each other. Gemma, who had been sitting quietly, finally spoke up. I didn't know she said that, she muttered, looking down at her hands. I never asked for any of this. I turned to her, my anger simmering. Maybe not. But you benefited from it, didn't you? You always knew she favored you. And you let it happen. Gemma had no response, and for the first time I saw a crack in her facade. Maybe she wasn't as complicit as I had always thought. But that didn't change what had happened. In the end, my mother couldn't talk her way out of this one. The truth was laid bare, and for once, there were consequences. Patrick, my stepfather, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. I've had enough of this, he said, his voice weary. Antonia, this is the last straw. I'm done. He filed for divorce a week later. As for me, I cut ties with my mother and Gemma. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. For the first time in my life, I felt free. Free from the manipulation, the constant comparisons, the endless cycle of emotional abuse. Callum and I moved forward together, stronger than ever. We built a life filled with love, trust, and honesty, everything my family had lacked. And as I stood there, looking out at the horizon, I knew that I had finally found peace. This was my happy ending, the one I had fought so hard to claim.